What's a family secret you found out by accident that flipped your whole view on life? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. I always knew my Uncle Jerry as a kid. He was a cool guy, but mostly a stranger who lived a few hours away from us and would only visit once every year or so. We were really close with the rest of the extended family, so this was a bit weird, but I never really thought about it. It wasn't until later that I realized that Uncle Jerry was much older than my dad, who was allegedly my grandparents' oldest child. Turns out Uncle Jerry was my grandmother's teen pregnancy, who she had given up for adoption and had reconnected with us when I was a baby. It was back in the day when these things were covered up, so she had gone off to the country to live with her older sister while she was pregnant and came home later, so even most of her brothers and sisters didn't even know. Apparently it was a big shock when he came back into our lives, but they all welcomed him. He was lucky and had been adopted by a wonderful family. Now he's just Uncle Jerry who pops in now and then and sends Christmas candy every year. Answer: I have a brother like that. Mom gave her first kid up for adoption at 17. He got adopted by a nice Jewish family in NYC. His parents passed away and he went looking for his biological mom. Well, he found us, and now I have another much older brother. It's nuts because I look nothing like my full brother, but could practically be identical twins with my half-brother. Story 2. My black sheep uncle was molested by a priest. All the brothers remained altar boys, and my grandmother went to Catholic church 6 days a week until she died. All the siblings are still devout Catholics. Turns out Uncle G isn't just moody, he's carrying trauma and betrayal. Answer: my aunt was molested by the family priest when she was 12 or 13. My dad, who is 18 years older, found out and went over and threatened to eliminate him if he came near the family again. When my dad's father died, his mother wanted that priest to officiate the funeral. Dad had never told any of the siblings until his brothers asked him why he was so against the priest being there. Dad had to take the car keys from them to stop them going to beat the priest up. Story 3. I found out my mom was one of the Tennessee Children's Home Society stolen babies. Google Georgia Tan. She and her sister were taken by this woman, and their parents were tricked into signing away their parental rights with promises of sending the girls to excellent schools and other lies. Both of the girls were taken to different states and literally sold to new parents. It was called adoption, but it was a black market baby ring. My mom found all of this out when I was 15, many years ago. My mom abandoned me and my 2 older brothers when I was very small, and my dad raised us, thank God. Over time, I came to understand that my mom had been badly abused by her adoptive mother and was mentally ill, in part from the abuse. I'm the only girl, so I've always resented her for leaving me and for not having a mom. So unfortunately, by the time I understood all that my mom had been through, she had already passed away. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the Reader's Digest version. It's a lot to carry around. Answer: holy glob, I have read about this case before on Reddit years and years ago, and they were still matching missing children to their bio parents, not to mention the ones that died in her care or who she sold them to. I was shocked how she got so many babies, something like 3,000, 6,000 from their parents, and it took so long to bust up the whole operation. Add to that shoot records, and it is unknown how many she actually sold. Story 4. This will probably get buried, but since you asked, trigger warning, this is pretty gruesome. In 2006, my dad, who was a severe alcoholic, was sent to prison for voluntary manslaughter. The victim was my grandmother, his mother. I was told that he'd pushed her, and she hit her head when she fell. I believe this because despite my dad's addiction, he was never really violent. Plus, he only served about 5 years for manslaughter, so surely it couldn't have been anything like takedown, right? Wrong. A few years after he was released, my dad forwards an email he'd received from my mom, which said, "Unlike the Menendez brothers, you used your bare hands." He CC'd my mom on this email so she could see that he sent it to me. My mom, bless her little heart, still hadn't quite figured out the difference between reply and reply all. So she responds to his email thinking she's only responding to him. She tells him about how she'd been protecting me from the truth all these years, that my cousin had read the autopsy report, and how my aunt and uncle had told her to tell me what actually happened, but she didn't want me to know. I immediately realized there was more to the story than had been told. And when I saw the line about the autopsy report, it occurred to me that it's a public record I could easily obtain. So I drove down to the medical examiner's office and got it. Turns out my dad had actually strangled my grandmother to passing while blackout tipsy. I was shocked. My dad gave his attorney permission to give me all the other documents related to the case. I met up with this attorney and was given a massive stack of paperwork, police reports, court transcripts, even crime scene photos. He was originally charged with takedown, but took a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter, aka a crime of passion, hence the very short prison sentence. So yeah, that was definitely the biggest family secret that I found out by accident. This all happened over a decade ago, and while I've mostly come to terms with it, it definitely still fudged with my head. The biggest problem with secrets is that they're not very good at staying secret. Story 5. This is a very personal story. I am legally blind. I have been since I was like 2. Multiple surgeries, lots of hospital time, retina specialists, etc. throughout my whole life. My parents told me how I lost my sight was that I cried a lot when you were a baby. And that's it. In adulthood, when I would go to the retinal doctor, they'd ask how it happened and I'd tell them, well, I guess I cried a lot. They were skeptical. Well, 2 decades after my mother died and right after my father died, I was told the real story by 2 different extended family members. My mother was always an alcoholic. That part I knew. What I didn't know was that when I was a baby, yes, I cried, and my mother would bang my head on the floor to stop me from crying. It destroyed my retinas. This was confirmed with an unrelated MRI I had done in 2021, where the notes said something about a perinatal insult. So both my parents took that little tidbit to their graves. Thanks, guys. Love ya. Edit. Holy outpouring, Batman. Thanks so much, everyone, for the supportive comments. Honestly, I am at peace now. I enjoy a fulfilling, happy life with a loving family and a bunch of fur babies to boot. Answer. I have somewhat similar story. I have a huge scar on my chest and some smaller ones on my shoulders and arms. My whole life I've been told that when I was 1 or 2 yo, I pulled tablecloth with freshly poured coffee that spilled all over me and basically melted the clothes I was wearing with my skin. I have no idea what material, but I believe it because the scar on my left arm ends in straight line by my wrist. My mother was there. She just turned around and I was fast. They rushed me to the hospital, skin plastic surgery, saved my life, no permanent problems, the best result that could be achieved. I never had problems with mother for this. Accidents happen, people aren't perfect, and like I said, no permanent issues. Except my mother used to be an alcoholic when I was a toddler, which I didn't know until 2018 when Dad died, and she fell into it again. That's when my older siblings started telling me all the things I had no idea about. And one of them was, of course, that she poured the coffee and then forgot about it because she was tipsy. I pulled the tablecloth while she was in bed tipsy, and it was Dad who saved me. In the end, your injury is way worse, and I am so sorry for you. Sending virtual hugs 3. Story 6. My mother, who looked down on divorced women and constantly made disparaging remarks about my divorce, was actually divorced before she met my father. Answer. I have a family member who was married, divorced twice. She managed to weave a wild story about her life to her children, who have never had a reason to doubt their mother, that left out marrying her high school sweetheart, and why that first marriage ended. And this member is crazy judgy about marriages. Meanwhile, I had no idea that her first wedding was an open secret in the family. My mother had copies of the first wedding photos and I knew who the bridesmaids were, other family members. Color me fudge surprised when I brought it up to that person's child during a conversation about marriages about a year ago. I was met with wide eyes and a gaping mouth. For the record, I'm 39. Nearly all of my life I knew of this, but the children, who are my age, didn't. Story 7. For context, both of my parents immigrated to my home country from their own respective home countries. My dad was very involved in a local organization run by and for people from his country, leading to him meeting his best friend. They both came here at different times, him as an adult and his friend as a child, but they're around the same age currently. I grew up calling this friend my uncle, as is standard for our culture. Up until recently, I had been told my uncle got to this country because he had been adopted as a child by a local family. He's always been a little odd, completely harmless, but odd. He's the kind of person who would give a stranger the shirt off his back if they needed it more than him. He's always struggled with money because he's far too trusting and far too generous, and his relationships have all been troubling. Mainly because he, again, will do nothing short of everything to help someone he thinks is in need. He's fairly well adjusted as an adult, but again, quite odd. Strange jokes, trouble with social and boundaries, that kind of thing. I chalked it up to being from another country and also being adopted by people who no longer speak to him. I was chatting with my mom about this after my uncle had sent me a weird post on Facebook. Nothing harmful, just not the sort of thing you'd expect an uncle to send to his niece. That's when my mom let me in on how he'd actually ended up in our country. He hadn't been adopted, he had been sold. His birth parents, for reasons unknown to anyone, has sold him to a family here in need of a farmhand, not hired, sold as a child slave in exchange for a single payment. He grew up essentially being trained to be willing to do anything for other people. That's why he's so odd and so generous. Broke my fudge heart, dude. Story 8. My 3 times great-grandfather knocked up the 13-year-old from the farm down the holler. After they married, she died giving birth to their second child at 16. He then proceeded to knock up and then marry her little sister, who was 13 at the time. The second one is my 3 times great-grandmother. This was rural Kentucky in the 18-something, so I don't know how shocking that actually was. Answer: I heard that it was not uncommon for the parents of the female that died have her sister marry the widow. It is thought that she would raise the surviving children like her own, whereas a woman from outside the family may not treat them right. It also helped to ensure that the maternal family was in the picture. I have done my family genealogy, and I have seen this play out quite a bit in my family tree, and sadly, I have seen young women married as young as 13 also to men in their 30s. I have one family line that the man married 3 sisters after the 2 died. Then he died, and his brother that was a widow married his brother's widower. Story 9. My grandmother's passing was likely an assisted tragic end via morphine OD. Apparently, she was in a lot of pain in the hospital and asked one of her sisters to just end it. Not sure how this was accomplished exactly, but it just feels dark and a weird rumor to have floating around the family for the rest of time. Answer: this is similar to how I believe my mother died. She was in the hospital to keep her safe, ironically, as my father was dying of cancer in the same hospital, and somehow took too many blood pressure pills. The problem is that normally hospitals confiscate meds and administer them themselves. She did have a bottle of prescription pills, though, in her purse on the other side of the room, and she was paralyzed on one side from a stroke. So either she was administered the wrong dosage of meds or someone took the bottle from her purse and opened it for her. I will never know. Story 10. That my uncle, who was a pastor in Indiana, died in a car crash. His car went over a bridge into a river. Turns out he faked his passing and was caught in Colorado with his mistress, the church secretary. Story 11. Growing up, I was told my first cousins were the product of forbidden topic, and there was a rift in the family from it. Lots of drama at the time. Parents told me their parents were also cousins. I recently started working on our family tree and have come to realize the parents were not cousins, they were siblings. This isn't as dramatic as some other stories here, but I never had anyone to tell. Story 12. My grandmother, the uber-judgmental Christian, gave birth to my father exactly 9 months to the day after they married. When they passed away, we emptied their home and found an old safe. It had smelly money in it, the deed to their home, and the marriage certificate, dated a whole month after they claimed to have gotten married. She actually had the audacity to criticize and find my mother wanting, because she too was pregnant before marriage. Story 13. I was in college and broke up with my boyfriend, BC. I found out he slept with my friend. Cried for weeks to my mom over the double betrayal. A couple months go by and eventually I find out my mom is bisexual, which is totally fine. The problem is that I found out that said friend not only banged my BF, but had also been sleeping with my mom for several months. This caused a huge rift as they dated for about a decade. She only recently apologized for choosing former friend over her daughter. Story 14. There's a family member who has more money than other family members. Other family members basically formed a team to dislike the family member because the family member wouldn't give them money. It just showed me how money can ruin relationships easily. Answer: a family doesn't even have to have money for money to rip them apart. My mother, who is by all accounts a miracle considering her upbringing and siblings, has been helping her mom with end-of-life preparations, and the only fudge thing her stupid hick siblings have done to help is harass her constantly about setting up the will certain ways too, that they can continue to mooch of the tiny bit my grandmother has left. The sibling who lives on the property was not the one helping with end-of-life care. She's literally just there to sit around like a goddamn leech-vulture hybrid, lest anyone try to fight her for the slum house and acre of nothing that's doomed to be lost to debts anyway. Story 15. My grandfather lost his mother as a child, and it was always a sensitive topic for him, but every time I'd ask how it happened, I was told that she was very sick and eventually passed away. When I was about 15 years old and had a reproductive health talk with my mother, we touched on the topic of abortion, and then she let slip that my great-grandmother actually died of consequences of a back alley abortion gone wrong. At that time, abortion was illegal where we're from, and she decided to go through with it because my great-grandfather was an abusive alcoholic and a cheater who subjected her to marital violation and she couldn't support the children she already had. What's worse, he later married one of the women he cheated with, and they had more children. That woman then proceeded to abuse my 4-year-old grandfather and his sister, for instance, by starving them and tying them to the kitchen table while she fed her children. The kicker was, they all lived in the same village, just a few houses from each other, and the local tipsy I'd sometimes see while visiting my grandpa, and grandma was actually my great-grandfather, with whom my grandpa cut all ties, so he never even got to know even my mother, let alone me. It was really shocking to find that out at that age, and I think it really pushed me forward in advocating for women's rights. Answer: my grandmother had a similar type of husband. She ended up giving 2 of their children up for adoption to save their lives. She only kept my mom because he abandoned her while she was pregnant with my mom. Definitely a blessing in disguise that he left and never came back. She was able to get a divorce in his absence when my mom was just over a year old. My mom never knew him and only found out he had died when she was about 18 because she was trying to get a copy of her birth certificate. Story 16. I overheard my dad multiple times joking with his buddies about how he doesn't get any and my mom doesn't put out. I brought it up to her once after he died, and she rolled her eyes. She told me that they didn't have intimacy for nearly 8 years because my dad's arthritis got so bad, he told my mom he never wanted to have intimacy again because it was too painful for him. The whole thing was on him, but there he was, running his mouth to his friends. Story 17. Grandpa was closeted his entire life. He knew all of the local power players and big deals because he was the manager of the menswear department at the fanciest department store in town. I still remember walking around downtown with him. He could never make it more than a block without someone wanting to stop and chat. My uncle is also gay, and because our city isn't very big, there was a very limited queer scene when he came out in the 80s. The family found out because he started hearing a lot of, "Oh, you're so-and-so. I know your father, wink, wink, nudge, nudge." Grandpa and a few dozen other married men used to go up to an isolated roundabout in a local park, they called it the Fruit Loop, and get busy in the bushes. Half of the fathers on my mom's street growing up were apparently in the Fruit Loop Club. Anyway, the whole thing got exposed. Grandma served him divorce papers. He unsuccessfully attempted tragic end, but things were mostly calmed down, and Grandma was remarried by the time I was born, so I didn't know any of it. I suspected, and he vehemently denied, but only got confirmation when we were moving Grandpa into hospice, and my uncle, who is blind, told me to go in a specific dresser drawer and destroy everything in it. I did my duty and didn't look too hard at anything, but yeah, he was a great grandfather, and I miss him dearly. I'm glad he had my mom because otherwise I wouldn't exist, but I do wish he'd felt comfortable being himself before he died. Story 18. My mom has a sister I didn't know about until I was 16. I found a school picture of a girl named Kathy, and my grandma snatched it away from me and said she's nobody. Asked my mom, and she had a full meltdown. Told me it's her older sister from my grandma's first marriage who hasn't had anything to do with them for years. Told my grandma off and disappeared from their lives. I wish her well. My grandma is a rotten human being, and my mom isn't much better. Story 19. That my great aunt was actually my biological great-grandmother because she had a baby, my grandma, out of wedlock back in the 1920s when it was taboo. Story 20. My parents got divorced in the 70s. I learned through a chance discovery many years later that my father was cheating on my mother at that time. My mother's next husband was a hideous, corpulent, embarrassing, illiterate redneck. I much later learned that she had had a child by this person before she met my father. It's so strange because she was so much better than this vile character in every single way. I later learned that my mother's brother had encouraged the then young fat redneck to pursue my mother out of malice towards her. My uncle is a malevolent freak. Story 21. The reason my dad's brother doesn't talk to him is that while my dad was married to his high school sweetheart, he had an affair with his brother's girlfriend, my mom. The reason my mom didn't speak to her sister for several years is that after my mom caught my dad having his 1,000th estimate of an affair, her sister said, "That is how you got him." There's also been some weird shoot hinted about between my aunt, mom's sister, and 2 of my uncles, neither her brother. One is my dad's brother, the other is her other sister's husband. Story 22. That my mom had been married before my dad. I was looking through old photos for a family history project in high school and saw an album with an elaborate wedding. My mom and someone I didn't recognize. My parents also got married in a courthouse. I took it to my dad and asked him who it was. He told me to ask my mom. After a lot of hesitation, she told me that was her first husband. They got divorced because he turned out to be gay. Story 23. I have an aunt who pretty much disowned the entire family not long after I was born. I never heard anything good about her. They talked about how she was a snob to everyone and thought too highly of herself because she was a doctor. But as I grew up, I realized there was a clear hierarchy in the family. Golden children versus black sheep. Anytime a black sheep starts doing too well for themselves, the family finds another way to put them in their place. I found this out personally when I started doing too well for my place in the family. I ended up cutting out most of the family just like my aunt did. This made me curious, so I looked her up. She isn't some snob that looks down on people. She dedicated her career to providing medical care to those who couldn't afford it. So while all the family was busy talking trash and hoarding their money for bigger houses and lavish trips, my aunt was actually helping people. Story 24. On a random day, I realized that my mother's biggest hater is her own family. And that's the day I realized that, but their family means nothing. Answer. A buddy of mine started dating this girl when we were in HS, and her folks were always super hostile. He figured that they simply didn't like him, probably because he was banging their daughter. They continued to date in college, and her parents continued to take every opportunity to interfere with their relationship. They eventually got married, and then the real her came out. She was a freaking nightmare. Hostile, controlling, used intimacy as a weapon, the whole bit. Unfortunately, he was a doormat, and it took 10 years and at least 2 prolonged affairs for him to divorce her. After the divorce, he was dropping their kid off at his ex's mom's, and they had a long discussion about the ex. And she said something along the lines of, well, we did try to warn you about her. All the time he thought they didn't like him. It was their daughter they didn't like, and were trying to save him from himself. Story 25. I went to my father's ancestral country for the first time for a visit and decided to climb a mountain and scatter his ashes. A couple days later, I met my dad's cousin for the first time. She had a thoroughly documented family history and genealogy book. Come to find that same mountain where I scattered my dad's ashes. I guess my dad's aunt had gone missing there in the 70s and her body was never found. Pretty wild coincidence when it was a small, unpopular mountain in the middle of a country with a lot of mountains. Story 26. My mother lied to me my whole life about my dad. They split when I was 3, and I was told that he deserted us and wasn't paying child support and that he never tried to get in touch. When he did start paying child support and my mother won a legal case for back payments, she blew through 25 keti on, we still don't know what. When I was a teen, she would show me receipts for child support payments under 20 as an excuse for why we were so poor. 20 years later, when we sat down to reconnect, he showed receipts, returned sealed letters, and the divorce judgment stating I was supposed to spend summers with him and get to see him on other holidays. Those 20 child support payments, they were beyond what was required by the state, and the state chose to send them separately. So she would hide the fact that he was actually paying and paying extra to try to manipulate me further. Turns out he was the stable, sane parent, and I didn't get to find out until after a work accident that left him with a TBI. I've gone NC with her and will not speak with her ever again. She will never get to meet her grandson. Story 27. Received a FB message from a lady in Germany asking about my mother and brother, confirming details which I was quite impressed with. She then revealed that she was my aunt living in Germany and that my father's family had been looking for me for years. My mother had essentially walked away when I was a baby and changed our names. Back in those days, relatively efficient for becoming invisible in NZ. She then dropped a bombshell. Did I know I had half-siblings as well? 2 half-sisters and a half-brother. My half-brother's 2 weeks younger than me. Weird love triangle between my mom, my dad, his wife, who he had split with as she came to grips with being a lesbian. Not an easy feat in the early 80s, I imagine. So that saucy little love triangle ripped apart 2 families, 2 best friends, and left me not knowing who my father was or that I had half-siblings until I was 27. Absolutely insane. Story 28. The story of how I have 3 dads. When I was 17 years old, my mom confessed to me that my dad A is not my real dad, came up when I was asking questions for genetics homework from school. A few years later, I asked for some more details about the situation. Apparently, when my mom was married to Dad A, she was also fooling around with some of the doctors, both Dad B and Dad C at work, and ended up getting pregnant with me with Dad B. My mom knows this because, well, I look exactly like Dad B, but also because Dad B was suspicious that it was his and took a blood sample from me while I was in the NICU and did a paternity test. Dad B was a colleague and doctor friend of Dad C. When I was 8 years old, my mom divorced Dad A and married my stepdad. Dad C was amazing and the father I always needed. Unfortunately, Dad C passed away when I was 26, so we had a big celebration of life for him. My mom didn't tell me ahead of time, but she invited Dad B, my biological dad, to the celebration of life for Dad C. This was finally my first opportunity to meet my biological father, and it was at what was essentially Dad C's funeral. I had Googled Dad B and knew what he looked like, so I spotted him right away. He introduced himself, asked if I knew who he was. I said yes, he took a pic of us, and then left. That's the only time I ever met my biological father and have been trying to get in touch with him ever since. Sadly, I still have contact with Dad A. He's a pretty rough dude and in and out of prison all the time. I've never actually told him the truth that I'm not his kid, since I think it would destroy him. But there are times when he's an absolute jerk that I'm tempted to do that. Answer: wow. And that's wild and interesting. I probably wouldn't tell Dad A either, although he likely already knows or suspects. I'm sorry you lost Dad C. It sucks you didn't have more time with him. Sounds like Dad B may have a family that doesn't know about you. That may be why your mom had him come to the funeral, so he could meet you but not draw attention. They probably had an agreement so Dad C could take the role of your dad. Best wishes to you. Story 29. I don't know about whole view on life or even secret. Our grandmother was a scold, an uptight, prissy snob. Our table manners were never good enough. She didn't want us to be left-handed. She looked down on the unwashed masses. As children, we instinctively disliked her and thought nothing more about it. When I was 40, I learned that she grew up in downstate IL, almost Kentucky, on a work farm halfway house. Her family owned the farm and was paid by the county to take in the infirm, the mentally ill, felons from jail, anybody who would end up in the poorhouse. This was her world as a toddler, and she learned to differentiate herself so as not to be mistaken for just another end of the rotor. This taught me people are the way they are for a reason. Still didn't like her. Story 30. When I was a kid, my grandma had a lot of cats that kept dying. Sometimes they'd live months, sometimes years, but one by one, they would all end up dying. A few times a year, I'd get home from school and find out that another one had died unexpectedly. It got ran over by a car, is what the grown-ups always told me. Turns out, Grandma just likes to eliminate cats. She had a bunch of different torture, eliminate methods, her favorite being drowning them in bleach. If she ever had a rough day or whatever, she'd just grab one of the cats and have some fun. What really fudged with me isn't just what my grandma used to do, but the fact that all the adults in the family apparently knew and didn't say anything or stop her from getting more cats or anything. Story 31. My dad's parents never talked about their childhoods. Years later, I got into genealogy. I found the passing certificates for my grandparents. Grandpa's mom committed tragic end in 1922, leaving behind 7 children. Grandma's mom died in 1919 from complications of an abortion. Both were married to alcoholics. It explained a lot about my grandparents' behavior. My grandfather was very good to my grandmother. I suspect he was determined to not treat his wife the way his mother was treated. My grandmother was 3 when her mother died. I'm pretty sure her childhood was horrible, and she was definitely a mess. Answer: I don't know if it flipped my views, but it made me really sad and put me off genealogy for a while. It doesn't escape me that lack of birth control was a factor in both deaths. My grandmother, who left 7 children, also had at least 4 children die in early childhood or infancy. My other grandmother had 2 preschoolers and a toddler when she got an abortion. Of course, in 1919, abortions were very dangerous. How might things have been different if they'd had access to birth control? Story 32. My grandmother was always a horrible, mean woman. Vindictive, spiteful, would turn family against each other because everyone wanted to please her. Judgmental of people, and always very Christian. My grandfather passed when my mom, a child, so I'd never met him, but all accounts were that my grandparents were soulmates. Turns out she got pregnant with my oldest uncle while my grandfather was still married to his first wife. My grandparents met while he was on TDY to Fort Hood. So he leaves his first family, wife and 3 kids in Michigan, and moves to Texas with the love of his life and proceeds to marry my grandmother and have 8 kids, dying when the youngest was a toddler. It wasn't until after Grandma's passing that my mom and her siblings reached out to this other family. By that time, all their half-siblings had died, and it was very apparent that his first wife raised those kids in absolute poverty because this was the 1940s when women didn't have a lot of options. I didn't learn anything at all about this until my mom called me one day to tell me about how they're taking a road trip to see my half-cousins in Kentucky. Like, what? It should be noted that after my grandfather passed away, that Grandma was left with the house, his pension, and his SS. Not rich, but able to keep her kids fed and clothed and buy a small bakery and put them all to work. I'm sure she never gave half a thought to the other family who got nothing from this man and had very different outcomes. Story 33. I'd always been told that my great-grandparents were eliminated by a tipsy driver. A couple years ago, I learned that while that is technically true, it was a single-car accident. Story 34. My brother apparently died of CIDs at 4 months old. All my life, my alcoholic mother blamed my lazy father for not putting him in his crib when she went to the toilet, as he was on the waterbed. I was verbally abused due to being born 3 days after his birthday, so didn't have any decent birthdays ever. She pissed off and got married when I was 13. I found the reports and passing certificate as I was trying to find my birth certificate. Well, Dad actually didn't turn up on the scene until after the ambulance and police. My mother just left her child in a waterbed by himself. Let's say my nanny and I had a serious talk with serious truths. She lost religion and her daughter when he died, and I packed up and moved out before my mother came back remarried. Haven't been back since. I take SIDS very seriously, but I don't see that incident as SIDS. It was negligence that caused his passing. Story 35. Finding out I was adopted at 16 only to be told I was half adopted, and Mom, the woman who raised me, wasn't my biological mom, but Dad, the man who raised me, was my biological father, only to find out I was fully adopted at 25, and Dad, the man who raised me, wasn't my biological father. Confronted him. He didn't know. Somehow biological mom and adopted mom tricked him. I was basically an illegal back alley adoption. Edited to try to be more clear. Story 36. That my paternal great-grandfather was in the KKK, and my maternal great-grandfather eliminated a man. Story 37. I am pretty sure that there are many secrets that I have not learned and will not learn. On my mother's side, she had 6 brothers, sisters, and I only met about half of them. All of them were alcoholics or had severe issues consistent with either a borderline or narcissistic personality disorder. I did learn in my early 20s that I am 18 Native American. This was a long-held family secret until cash and oil money started becoming available, but you had to have lived on the reservation. They didn't understand that caveat. On my father's side, my grandfather's parents had an arranged marriage. His father, my great-grandfather, supposedly disappeared quickly, but they had 7 kids, so he didn't disappear that quickly. My grandfather also had a ton of stories involving the mafia, so I suspect that organized crime was somehow involved. In my life, I suspect that I am not the biological father of 2 of my 3 legal children. I eventually caught my ex in an affair. That's why we are not married. I am certain that her affair partner is not their father due to a number of factors. I am pretty sure that he isn't her only affair partner. Anyway, both kids were conceived under suspicious circumstances. I know she cheated, and neither of them has, in my opinion, any resemblance to me or my family. Answer: my father is positive I'm not his kid. Had me do a DNA test in my 20s at the time. He said it was to see what our ancestry was, as he got a great deal on the tests. So we did it. Results come back that he's my father. Half my genetic makeup is from him, and he still refuses to accept him his child because I look like my mom's ex before their relationship started. I even pointed out that the DNA came back saying he's my dad, and he's insisted, since that the only reason it says that is because he has me on his family tree on the website. Moral of the story: your kid can be yours without looking like anyone in your family. Please don't treat them differently because of how they look. My father broke my heart by insisting I'm not his when I so obviously am. Story 38. My grandma was a very sweet lady, but sometimes she said really hurtful things and had strange nights when she'd ask about a little baby girl. It wasn't until right before her passing that I found out she had actually been schizophrenic. That little baby girl she kept asking about was a baby she had been forced to abort because my granddad, her husband, didn't want daughters, only sons. Story 39. My much younger brother comes up to me one day and asks, why would Mom comment to me, that you look so much like your Uncle Eddie? Eddie is her uncle on her side of the family. Eat it. By marriage. I had to go digging for that. Minor relief there. Our dad had bladder cancer and was assumed to be sterile after they had me due to treatments. My brother was a miracle baby. Our dad had since passed away from the cancer, and she made this comment about 5 or so years after he passed. My mom has a history of alcoholism and a vague history of at least emotional affairs. I am NC with her for many reasons, mostly due to the adult beverage. I am not getting an ancestry test anytime soon. Story 40. My white great aunt, who had 2 children from a black man, would lock them in a closet when they were kids. Whenever she had friends over BC, she didn't want the friends to know she had black kids. Also, my grandmother and one of her sisters are also cousins because their mom cheated on her husband W, his brother. Also, no one knew until he was dead, but my grandfather, who was horrible to us all, was gay and left everything to his lover when he died, and nothing to my mother. Story 41. I wouldn't say it turned my life upside down or anything. It was just something I never knew. My mother died in 2021, and as I was cleaning out her apartment, I found paperwork with her birth date on it, but a different name, along with adoption papers with my grandmother and grandfather's names. I called my uncle, Mom's brother, and he basically told me that my mother was born out of wedlock. As in, Grandma wasn't married to my mother's bio dad, and this was back in the 30s. So when Grandma married my grandfather, he legally adopted my mother, and they changed her name. Apparently, my mother knew and had been in contact with her bio father for a while. I don't know how long. She never mentioned it to me, and if she did, I honestly don't remember. The thing is, she never referred to my grandfather as her stepfather, nor did she refer to my uncles as her step-half-brothers. I don't know how many other people in my family know about this, because we're all spread out now. And honestly, since my grandmother, who was the rock of our family, died, we haven't had the chance to get together much anymore. It doesn't change anything major in my life. I just wonder why she never told me. Story 42? Kita no. I wouldn't say it was an accident, but after being raised solely by a single mother who insisted my entire life, and until she died when I was 33, that my father was her old friend Larry, who got married just after I was born, explaining the total absence from my life, I decided at age 37 to write to him to ask to meet up to exchange health information before he died. Larry's daughter was kind enough to reach out to me against her father's wishes, and let me know that my father was actually my mother's old friend Dave. At least a dozen people, including Dave, and one of 4 aunts knew this, but let my paternity be an inside joke for nearly 4 decades because my mother was scary and insistent. I now say my mother is both dead and dead to me. My mother, father, aunt, and their friends were all raised in ideal nuclear families. They didn't go through crap like 4 evictions in their childhood. They didn't have to live in an unfinished basement throughout middle school. They didn't have to work 3 side jobs in addition to their full-time job to finally be able to afford a car at 28 years old because they put themselves through college in hopes of doing better than their mother, who relied heavily on her family's support for all 60 years of her life. They were never somebody's emotional support child, their only reason to live. My aunt, as I explained to her 92-year-old father, that my mother had lied to me and scared a dozen people into lying as well, had the audacity to exclaim, "But you turned out just fine." No, she and my mother turned out just fine because they had 2 capable parents who supported them and their fatherless children, paid for their unfinished college degree in cash, and helped them buy, remodel, and pay for a 4-bedroom home in a H-call area. So now my grief has turned to rage at both my mother and those who allowed her to emotionally and financially hobble me for her sole benefit and for selfish reasons. I used to think highly of my mother and my aunt, who has 2 adult kids who don't even have a guess at who their fathers are, for being single parents in the 1980s and raising us by themselves. But looking back, I feel like they purposely took advantage of my grandparents, as both of their mothers were scorned for getting pregnant before marriage, one having been adopted as a toddler for that reason. My grandparents overcorrected and never even asked about the 3 men that could have been involved in their grandkids' lives, at least financially. 2 of those 3 men regularly sipped beer, sat by the pool, and watched my grandfather's hard-earned pension after raising his own 5 children go towards keeping a roof over the heads of 2 little kids they helped create. It's disgusting. More details because I'm salty. Story 43. Just found out my great-grandma gave birth to her first child when she was 11 and went on to have 10 more kids by the same man who was married, but not to her. Apparently common for the island my family is from. Story 44. Didn't really flip things, but I had a great aunt who ran a brothel in a Navy town up until the end of WW2. My grandfather served in WW1, and upon being shipped home, he was discharged in NYC, got all his pay, and then disappeared for a couple of months. Nobody knew where he was. The Army was like, "We discharged him, not our problem." When he finally showed up back home, he just said he was taking a look around, and that was that. Story 45. TBH, this is not a OMG, I'm related to an evil person type deal. Learning more of my dad's past is truly fascinating in how contradictory he was. Like after university, he spent majority of his savings motorcycling around all of East Asia and Indonesia because, fudge it, why not? It was during his travels he met my mom once he got back to the States and began working as an engineer and got assigned to Tokyo. Speaking of my mom, her younger self was a mixed bag of emotions, rebellion in Japan, and heartbreak all in one. One story that stands out to me is how in the late 70s, she was dating a rich British guy who loved to zip around on mopeds in San Fran. She was living there during her study abroad. One night, he was weaving in and out of traffic with my mom holding onto his back. He runs a light and is immediately sideswiped by a taxi cab. Both go flying into the street. He died on impact and landed next to my mom. My mom only had a concussion and multiple scrapes, bruises. She told my siblings and I that her only thought at that time was, "The stars are beautiful tonight." She was facing the sky and truly thought her lower half was paralyzed. That British BF she was dating was secretly driving my mom to a romantic spot in order to propose. It never happened. Story 46. IDK if it is a family secret, but my mom didn't talk much about her parents and such. My aunt, her younger sister, told me at my mom's funeral that they are affair children, that my grandma had with a married man, and that their stepfather, who later married my grandma, tried to violation my mom when she was a teenager, and my grandma didn't leave his jerk. For context, I didn't know my grandparents. They all died either before my birth or when I was very little. Oh, and my older half-sister told me that she never accepted my dad, her stepfather, at my mom's funeral too. My dad died when I was 14. IDK why they thought that I need to know those things now and at such a time, but I am low contact with them anyway. Story 47. I found out that my father was a pedophile and a perv. I don't think my family ever planned on telling me, but my brother's then girlfriend, now wife, told me the actual truth about the person that was supposed to be my father. Around the time that I was only a couple of years old, my dad was preying on my older sister, and one of the maids we had at the time, who was only 16, 17 years old, he showed my sister his thing, and he violated our maid. Our maid went to tell my mom, and my mom, being so completely blinded by love, did not believe her. My sister also came forward and told my mom, but again, my mom didn't believe her because she was so blinded by love. That maid ended up resigning via a note that she left on her pillow. Apparently, my mother paid the maid to keep silent so that she wouldn't report my father to the police. It completely changed my perspective on everything in my life. How love can make you so blind that you would do things that go completely against your moral compass. How the people in your life could be totally different from who you think they are. Up till now, I am still quite shocked. My relationship with my mom has never been the same ever since I found this out. My view on my dad is completely different, and I could never look my sister in the eyes properly. Up till now, my relationship with her hasn't been the best. Story 48. I thought we grew up dirt poor. Turns out my mom and stepdad were making over $100K a year in rural Kansas in the 90s. It was only when it came to me and what I needed were we poor. My mom also received about $1K a month from the government until I was 18 because I was a very sickly child in and out of the hospital. Story 49. My grandparents, who I adored, abused the shoot out of my mother. My granddad beat my mom so much as a teenager she wet herself. It changed my view of my mom, who was my abuser. She would fly into fits of rage over minor things and beat me and my sister. I don't forgive her because she never takes any accountability, but I do empathize with her pain. Story 50. Y'all have crazy stories. My dad knew about his surprise 40th birthday party, but acted surprised for everyone else. He told us 14 years later on a family vacation. We have a lot of drama. Story 51. This one is about me specifically. My current parents adopted me, and it was a planned and closed adoption from the LDS Church. Years ago, the church would help with adoptions, and this was common at the time to allow young mothers to go through the LDS Church to give their children in these services. I never met my birth parents. Naturally, since it was closed, nothing was ever said. I was told at a very young age that I was adopted, but nothing more. I found out in my late teens that my birth mother died of leukemia, and my birth father is somewhere out there. Well, for Christmas, I was given a genetic test kit. Me thinking nothing of it as I was trying to find out my genetic history since I was pregnant at the time and wanted to know what could possibly be passed on to my child, sent it in. It was through this channel that I was introduced to my whole sort of family. I also met my birth father through this route. To say the least, this program I was adopted into was a blessing. I'm not religious, but someone was looking out for me, literally. My birth father is a nutcase. He did many substances, was abusive to my birth mother from other sources I've found, has been in and out of jail, almost got sent to prison, many more things. The kicker is that he had a kid with another woman 20 years later, and I got in contact with him, and he has told me that my birth father is trash and there is any reason to keep a relationship with him. It changed my view that one decision absolutely changes someone's life, and I just can't help but think how lucky I am to have been adopted into a family that is the polar opposite of my birth family. Story 52. My dad was always quiet when we were growing up and seemed slightly sad. He was a good dad, but reserved. When I was an adult, my mom told me that when my dad was 15, his dad, my grandfather, had shot himself with a shotgun in their basement, and my dad found him. He wasn't dead. My dad called an ambulance and did what he could for his dad. My grandmother fell to pieces, so my dad had to be the one who talked to the doctor at the hospital and decide to take dad off of life support. I was always very gentle with my dad after that. Story 53. My grandmother apparently cheated on every single one of her husbands with the same man, her teenage crush. And all but the first husband died from a mysterious stomach ailment doctors could never explain. We all have exactly the same thought you're having now. I accidentally found out about the affair when I answered the phone at my father's house. It was a strange man asking for her, and since she was out, I asked for his name and any message he'd like to leave. He yelled at me, called me a few ugly names, then hung up. I waited around a few hours, then 69, return call, and asked the very nice woman who answered the phone. Needless to say, Grandma was horrified and angry at me. Story 54. I just found out from an older sibling that my dad is not my biological dad. I've been dealing with a plethora of horrific medical symptoms for 2 years with no answers. Finally got multiple diagnoses, only to find out these illnesses are genetic. None of my parents have any of these illnesses or genetic issues, but guess who does? The dude my older sibling caught red-handed banging my mom while still with my dad. My blood type is different from my siblings, and I lost my hearing due to a genetic condition that apparently is common in the side dude's family. Upon research, I realized my birth certificate was never signed by my dad until I was 7. My new BC reflected a change-up date, and boom, new BC with my dad's name now on it. Mom says it was a clerical error, and that's all. I cannot begin to explain how betrayed I feel. I haven't told a soul since I found out. My mother will take it to the grave. I try to question and ask the questions, and she has a quick, calculated answer that is straight-up lies. TLDR. Got super sick, finally diagnosed multiple genetic conditions. No one in my family has history of said illnesses. Sibling admits to catching mom cheating right before I was conceived. Real dad is not my dad. Story 55. My gran got to the age of 92 before finding out she had a half-sister, as her father had an affair with a neighbor. Unfortunately, her half-sister passed before she could meet her. Story 56. My sister accidentally came across a love letter between my mother and our dentist. My parents were still married. We later found out that it was a years-long love affair. My parents later divorced without my father finding out. It ended in the dentist passing from cancer. Story 57. My dad admitted to setting our house on fire rather than lose it to foreclosure. He admitted it 15 years later when he and my mom were going through a divorce. I was only 3 when it happened, so I have very few things from my early childhood. It always bothered me because my sister, 6 years younger, has baby books, clothes, shoes, etc. that I never had. To learn that it was intentional was rough. Story 58. I was 15 when I found out the following while reading my mom's journals after she passed away by tragic end. My mom and my grandmother always had a rocky relationship. My mom seemed to dislike her, and she always told me that she will tell me why when I'm older. Unfortunately, that day never came. Turns out my mom's 2 older brothers used to intimacy molest her when she was a small child. The brothers were in their teens at the time. When my mom finally told my grandmother years later, she straight up didn't believe her and cast her as the black sheep of the family, causing my mom's mental health to spiral for years. Turns out, through my own experiences, I found out how batshit crazy my grandmother is, so I could 100 relate to everything my mom was writing. It made me understand her tragic end a lot more. May she rest in peace away from that dragon lady. Story 59. My mom was always so secretive of her past. She wasn't close to her family, never taught us her native language, and would seem evasive when answering any question we would have about her life before she met my dad. It seemed like she was keeping us from her family. She was also so concerned that I was going out whoring around. Bad grade? I was obviously pregnant. Made a new guy friend? Must be sleeping with him. Used tampons. It's because they make me feel good. True, but not in the way she implied. I don't know what made me come to the conclusion or why it took so long for me to figure out, but suddenly it dawned on me that she must have another child. It just made so much sense to me. Then for some reason, my parents decided to tell my husband about it, thinking he wouldn't tell me. I still haven't told my mom that I know. She went to great lengths to keep this from us, that I feel it's kind pretending I don't know. Her sibling has told us some stuff, probably what she was afraid would happen, and it really seems like she was traumatized by the whole experience. Story 60. My great-aunt was trans. I didn't know until I was an adult and saw a photo of her pre-transition. The shocking part is that my very Mormon parents were militantly protective of her. Story 61. That the reason my oldest sister was outed by the whole family was because she had a one-night stand with our cousin-in-law, which was understandable. Also, the reason my uncle was outed by the whole family was because he was gay, which was unreasonable. Story 62. I recently found out that my uber-judgmental, pious, and prude mother had a history of exclusively dating men who were already in relationships, marriages. Story 63. That my mother was schizophrenic. I had called some of her doctors trying to piece together strange events from my childhood, and a doctor just blurted it out. It completely collapsed my trust with the adults around me because everyone always tried to make light of what I knew was strange and erratic behavior. Story 64. My grandparents had a lavender marriage. They were both gay, but got married and had children to keep up appearances. Story 65. Nobody will tell me for sure, but I'm pretty sure my aunt is my real mom. My uncle died very tragically a few months before I was born. My aunt had a serious mental breakdown and was institutionalized for like a year. My parents took in her daughter, my cousin, who was 16 at the time. My aunt is my godparent. My brother and sister do not have godparents. My aunt and I have always been close. She used to come to all my school events, never missed a big event for me, but wasn't there for my siblings. I was told it's because she loves you. My mom and dad are both blue-eyed. My siblings look just like my parents with blonde hair and blue eyes. I have dark hair, green eyes, and I am inches shorter than my mom and my sister. My aunt has dark hair and green eye and is only about half an inch taller than me. My uncle also had dark hair and green eyes. I look just like my cousin in color. Build, face shape. My siblings have baby books and baby blankets. There are pictures of my mom pregnant with both of them. Baby shower photos, nursery photos. There is not a photo of me before my first birthday. No pics or documents of my mom pregnant. I don't have an original birth certificate. Just printed copy of a generic one that lists only basic details and does not have my father listed at all. Nobody will tell me the truth, but when I asked my mom, she didn't confirm or deny it, just shook her head at me and said, "I'll always be your mom." Answer, she didn't confirm or deny it, just shook her head at me and said, "I'll always be your mom." That's confirmation. A bio-parent wouldn't phrase it that way, and it's a lovely sentiment, but yeah, at this point, it would be nice to just hear the truth. There's no shame in it. You understand why it happened. They all agreed to prioritize your relationship with your aunt. So what's the difference? Yes, they're your parents. You'll always be their daughter. But still, you'd like to know. You'd like to embrace it as a family. What a thing to live with all her life. I'm just glad that she was supported somewhat. At least you were able to stay in the family. All the best. Story 66. My mom was abandoned by her parents and raised by her grandparents. They were both alcoholics, and she was always told that was the reason why. During the pandemic, I picked up some of her dad's military records that I had ordered a year or so previously and discovered that he was deployed during the time she would have been conceived. This led me down a deep rabbit hole with DNA where I finally found her dad. He's been dead about 5 to 6 years, unfortunately, but she has half-siblings out there. It would seem that while her legal dad was deployed, her mom cheated on him, got knocked up, and when he came home after 2 years, she had a 1-year-old kid. This rocked their marriage for obvious reasons, and he moved to another state. Her mom left my mom behind and went after him. They ended up having 3 more kids together, but a very rocky marriage, and my mom always wondered why they kept her siblings but didn't want her. This led to me finding out that my mom has some very bizarre views on family. She said she has no interest in contacting her half-siblings because it would destroy their world. She is older than them and was born 4 and 5 years before their dad even met their mom. She also said that even if he was alive, she wouldn't want to contact him because most likely he never knew about her and it would just remind him of a past mistake. I don't get it at all. Story 67. My mom did meth while being pregnant with me, and it was so bad I tested positive for meth at birth. Found out accidentally when I requested a copy of my medical records from the time I was a minor and decided to look through them. My theory is that it screwed up my brain bad enough for me to become neurodivergent. I was diagnosed with ADHD, CD, and dyslexia as a kid, and to this day I still struggle with some of the symptoms. What messes with my head, though, is that I'll never know if I suffered brain damage before being born or I would have been neurodivergent even if she led a healthy lifestyle. Answer: hey friend, I don't know if this is helpful, but I am neurodivergent and there's a strong family history. There is also a strong family history of amphetamine abuse, and my doctors all agree that it is most likely because stimulants are very, very common self-medication paths for people with undiagnosed ADHD. You'll never know for sure, and a stranger on the internet can't tell you anything about you or your family, but this information really helped me to find some peace and forgiveness when I was ready to do so. Story 68. My sweet, generous, kind grandmother, so pious, frequently said nasty things about Granddad in front of anyone within earshot. He was just a dirt farmer, while she was from better stock, and married him as she had no alternative. We're talking 1920 here. She accused him of infidelity, physical abuse, etc. That's not the secret. Not long before he died, he brought to my mother a tightly bound stack of notes she'd written to him, which he'd collected over decades, detailing her own multiple affairs and how those men were so much better than he was. This guy got her through the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, worked his jerk off, made sure the kids had a roof over their heads and food to eat, and paid for Grandma's every need. As he lay dying of a heart attack, crying and begging for her to call an ambulance, she refused. I heard her say part that myself. Story 69. Was told from childhood my mother had a sister that died on her 17th birthday in a car accident. Said sister never existed, but I did find out about an uncle she never mentioned that was real. Story 70. Had an uncle with a happy family of 2 kids growing up. He died when his children are all grown up around late 20s. At the funeral, there were 2 people around his kids' age, which surprisingly looked just like him. After some time, the whole extended family, including his kids, just found out that he had another family with 2 kids in a different city, so he had 2 wives and 4 children. Turns out every other week he'll go to this city and be with his other family and raise the kids without his first family knowing. I guess his first wife had a hunch, but decided to keep it to herself and not tell the kids, because how come you're not suspicious with that routine getaway? All his life, he managed to lie to everyone, including his parents. He managed to keep the other family as a secret until the day he died. The true definition of take your secrets to the grave. Story 71. The way my parents, when my paternal grandfather passed away when I was 11, shocked me. It was the first time I had seen their ability to have a completely duplicitous perspective. That is, it was immediately after he passed away that they both dropped what had turned out to be a complete act in terms of how polite and nice they had been to my grandfather while he was alive. Immediately upon his passing, I saw them both drop their masks regarding their relationship with him. I remember them both smiling, sighing, and shaking their heads as though they had both basically been playing the nice card the whole time, to basically wait around until my grandfather's will was sorted out. I remember being completely shocked by the fact that they had clearly been completely fake with him the whole time. Mind you, in his defense, there was an extremely tender moment when, that same day, I remember seeing my dad cry for the first and last time when he was helping to carry his father's coffin during the end of the funeral mass. Who knows? Maybe there's a lot more to that whole story than I'll ever know. My mom did something similarly odd at my dad's deathbed at one point when she entered the hospice room with one of my brothers. My dad was hours away from passing and unable to move, speak, or respond. I was sitting with him quietly, and then my mom and brother suddenly appeared in the hospice room for a visit with my dad before his passing. I was basically expecting them to say, do something kind, gentle, as we had all been doing up until that point over the months. Instead, they jeered at him. They jeered at him, said something insulting about him, and then the 2 of them walked out together. My blood ran cold. In the 8 years since my dad's passing and the 42 years since my grandfather's passing, I've always forced myself to keep in mind the fact that no matter how sweet and kind people can genuinely be most of the time, it's important to have a kind mind but a smart heart, and to remember that even people whom are typically very cordial may also possess the ability to be quite fake after all. BTW, I'm sending my deepest sympathy and condolences to everyone else whom has shared their experiences on this thread. XX. Story 72. Found out my parental grandmother had a whole other family she literally walked out on. She apparently dropped her kid at the babysitter like usual one day, went home and packed and left without a word. Left the kid with the sitter and didn't say a word to her first husband. Just vanished. After she died, my father was clearing out her house and found her first marriage license. His uncle then told him that not only did he have a sibling he never knew about, but his uncle actually knew him. It was wild. We always knew she was nut job, we just had no idea she was off her rocker her whole life. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.